My name is Darren Kessler. I worked sanitation on Detroit's east side for 11 years, most of that time on overflow and missed stop collection, which meant I saw more of the city between midnight and sunrise than most cops, paramedics, or insomniacs ever do. People hear garbage collector and think the worst part is the smell. It isn't. You stop smelling it after a while. Your body gives up on that fight and saves itself for things that matter more, like diesel fumes, rotting plaster after rain, freezer burn air rolling out of abandoned houses in January, and the sweet, wrong smell that comes off a mattress somebody's wrapped around a dead dog and left in an alley. What stays with you isn't the trash, it's the patterns. You learn what should be on a curb, what shouldn't, and what it means when people start doing the same strange thing without ever speaking to each other. A house with 6 tires 1 month usually means a nephew is working on cars. A block with 20 busted TVs means somebody got paid under the table to clear out a storage unit and dumped the junk where the cameras don't work. Bag after bag of wet clothes and children's school papers usually means a basement flood. You see enough of that, and you start to read neighborhoods the way some people read weather. That's why I knew the house on Keating Street was wrong before I ever touched a bag in front of it. It wasn't because it was boarded up. Half of Detroit looked boarded up in the years I worked that route. It wasn't because the yard was dead, or because the porch sagged, or because the windows had gone black from the inside. I'd seen blocks full of houses like that. It was because every Thursday, without fail, the bags appeared at 12:17 a.m. Not before, not after, and nobody living ever came out to set them there. I know how that sounds. If I heard somebody say it the way I'm saying it now, I'd assume they were filling the dark with something bigger than it was, or trying to dress up an ordinary story, because ordinary stories don't get repeated. But I spent most of my adult life lifting what people throw away, and if there's one thing I learned doing that job, it's that people do not carefully place 3 tied black bags at the edge of a curb at the exact same minute every week, unless something is making them. I'm telling this now because the house is gone. At least, the lot where it stood is empty. That should make it easier to forget. It hasn't. The city called our shift overflow, but what that really meant was we cleaned up everything the daylight routes couldn't or wouldn't get to. Missed stops. Illegal dumping. Apartment rows where the bins overflowed into alleys. Blocks where stray dogs had torn open curb bags and dragged diapers, food trays, and tax papers down the sidewalks like streamers. We ran from midnight until 8 if the truck held together and the hydraulics didn't freeze. Most nights I rode with a driver named Miguel Soto, who had been with DPW longer than me, and moved with the steady patience of a man who had accepted that the city would always be 10 years behind its own problems. The truck was a rear loader, older than both of us put together, dented on one side, cab heater working only when the engine felt charitable. The metal steps on the back were slick with old grime no amount of pressure washing ever fully stripped away. In summer, the rails felt greasy by 2 a.m. In winter, they burned your gloves through. You learned to mount and dismount without thinking, learned how to grab a bag by the knot and swing it clean into the hopper so it didn't burst against the lip, learned to spot sharps by the shape pressing through plastic, learned to recognize the sound of broken glass versus bones from butcher scraps versus soaked magazines. People who never work trash think it's mindless labor. It isn't. It's repetition, which is different. Repetition makes room for observation. You start noticing porch lights that never change bulbs, the same old man sitting in the same window each week, the houses where someone always leaves a little extra space near the bags, as if whoever carries them out is afraid to stand too close. We were on streets where every third house looked hollowed out. Then we'd turn a corner and find a woman sweeping her front steps at 1 in the morning because she worked double shifts, and that was the only time she had. The city was never one thing long enough for you to get used to it. Keating was a narrow street off the east side, not far from where the blocks got patchy, and the empty lots outnumbered occupied houses. Old brick 2 stories mixed with frame houses, some kept up, some barely holding their porches to the foundation. Street lamps there had a way of leaving whole sections in orange shadow. If it had rained, water settled in the broken places near the curb and reflected the lights in strips that made the road look deeper than it was. When I first got that section of the route, Keating didn't stand out much. Just another tired block where people kept living, because leaving cost money. The house was 14082. Narrow front steps, chain link fence hanging crooked at the latch, 3 dead arbor vitae along the side yard, and a white storm door yellowed enough to look nicotine brown even from the truck. The front windows were boarded from inside, not plywood outside, but something darker beyond the glass, like heavy curtains or paint. The mailbox hung open. The city had marked the place vacant twice, once with an orange sticker that disappeared, once with a paper notice stapled to the doorframe that got rained into pulp. But every Thursday, at 12:17 exactly, 3 black bags appeared at the curb, not loosely tossed either. Stood upright, knots turned away from the street, 6 inches between each one. The first time I saw them, I assumed somebody inside heard the truck and ran them out fast. The second time, I checked my phone when Miguel stopped at the hydrant across from the address. 12:16, no bags there. I climbed down, grabbed 2 cans from the next house over, dumped them, looked back, and there they were, 3 bags, dry tops. No sound of a door, no porch light, nothing. I walked to the curb and stopped because I felt something I didn't like. Not fear exactly, more like the sensation you get when you reach for another step and there isn't one. The world had skipped a beat somewhere and my body caught it before my mind did. Miguel leaned on the horn once, short and irritated. You loading those or admiring them? I loaded them. They were heavy, but not impossible. Wet weight, loose, shifting, like old carpet or soaked clothes. No smell beyond the usual curb mix, no tearing, no movement. I threw them in, hit the packer, and we kept going. 2 streets later, I heard something hit the inside of the hopper. Not a normal slide, not the tumble you get when a bag rolls under compaction. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Metal on metal from inside the load. I looked at Miguel, he looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a second. Then he turned the radio up. That would have been it for most people. Something weird in a job full of weird things. But after that, Keating kept finding ways to make itself harder to explain. Some weeks the bags were colder than the air, with frost clinging to the plastic in August. Some weeks, one had a wet circle at the bottom, like it had been standing in water. Once there was pine sap smeared near the knot, fresh and bright, on a street with no pines for blocks. Another time I caught the smell of wet earth and old pennies coming off one before I even touched it. We started arriving at the corner early just to watch. No one came out. No shadow moved behind the door. Nothing crossed the yard. But at 12:17 the curb was empty, and at 12:17 the bags were there. Miguel stopped joking about it after the 4th week. He didn't scare easy. He'd pulled raccoons out of bins with a shovel, found a prosthetic leg in a mattress pile, seen a man sleeping inside a commercial dumpster in January, and wrapped the lid hard enough to save him from being compacted. He believed in fatigue, bad wiring, stray animals, and people being worse than animals when money got tight. That was his whole religion. One night on the way back to the yard, he said, "You ever check the tickets on that address?" "What tickets?" "Complaints, missed stops, vacancy notices, water shut off, something." I hadn't. At the yard, the dispatch office still had a corkboard with route maps curling at the corners, and a filing cabinet nobody trusted because half the drawers stuck. Old paper never really left that place. Even when they digitized something, somebody printed it back out and shoved it into a folder. I looked up 1482 Keating and found a stack thicker than it should have been for one dead property. Code enforcement notices, utility shutoff, rodent complaint, illegal occupancy suspicion. 3 separate sanitation notes flagged in red over the years. One said, "Do not service before midnight." Another said, "If material is warm, leave curb load in place and report to supervisor." The oldest one, photocopied so many times the letters had gone gray at the edges, just read, "Refer to Hale." I asked around and found out Hale was Vernon Hale, retired 2 years earlier after 28 years on the department, and a shoulder that never healed right. He still came by the yard sometimes for coffee, because retirement had not made him any less suspicious of quiet. He was there the next Thursday, leaning on the chain link by the salt pile in a tiger's cap and a brown work jacket worn shiny at the cuffs. When I asked him about Keating, he looked at me long enough that I almost thought he hadn't heard. Then he said, "They put you on that house?" I said yes. He asked, "You been collecting it regular?" I said yes again. He looked past me at the yard, at the trucks backing in, the steam rising off the wet concrete under the floodlights. "You hear knocking yet?" I didn't answer right away, and that was enough for him. He took a folded paper from inside his jacket pocket. It wasn't official letterhead, just lined notebook paper, yellowed and soft at the creases, covered front and back in block handwriting darkened over pencil marks. At the top it said Keating, like it was a route note, but the rest wasn't anything the city would ever put in writing. He told me to read it alone. I read it in the cab while Miguel smoked by the garage door. There were 7 rules. Rule 1, never service 1482 Keating before 12:17 a.m. If bags are present earlier, record the address as blocked and continue. Rule 2, from the cab, count the bags before your boots touch the street. Count again from the curb. If the number changes, leave immediately and do not report a missed stop until sunrise. Rule 3, if a bag is warm, sweating, or giving off breath through the knot, leave all bags in place and notify Hale, or, if Hale is unavailable, mark equipment issue and end the block. Rule 4, do not compact any material taken from 1482 until you have crossed 2 intersections and can no longer see the house in any mirror. Rule 5, if you hear knocking after compaction, do not open the hopper. Drive directly to transfer and remain in the cab until the load is dumped. Rule 6, if the front door opens while you are on the curb, do not look at the person in the doorway. Finish the load if possible. If not possible, leave the bags. Rule 7, if dispatch calls later to say Keating was missed, answer that you have never serviced that address in your life. At the bottom, beneath the rules, Vernon had written one more line. These rules are for the workers, not the house. I laughed once when I finished, not because it was funny, but because my brain needed somewhere for the pressure to go. Then I got out and walked over to Vernon and asked him what any of it meant. He took his time lighting a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have on city property. "It means," he said, "you don't get curious where curiosity can get counted." That wasn't an answer. I told him so. He nodded. "Best one you're getting." I should have handed him the paper back and told dispatch to reassign the stop to somebody who still thought these things were jokes. I should have taken the whole thing to a supervisor and demanded something more useful than a dead man's scavenger hunt. But city jobs teach you a special kind of silence. If something weird has been allowed to survive on paper for that many years, it means enough people have decided it's cheaper to work around it than solve it. And I had a daughter in Warren, child support pulling clean out of my check, a truck note, and a body that had already been broken in enough ways that starting over somewhere else sounded less brave than stupid. So the next Thursday, I kept the paper in my breast pocket and drove to Keating, with the rules folded against my chest. At 12:16, the curb was empty. At 12:17, there were 3 bags. The first thing I learned was that counting matters. From the cab, I counted 3. I said it out loud because Vernon's handwriting had put me in a mood where saying things felt safer than thinking them. Miguel, who hadn't seen the paper but knew enough by then not to joke, said, 3. I stepped down off the truck. Gravel crunched under my boot where the curb had broken into the gutter. I counted again. 4. They were standing so neatly I almost missed it. 3 black bags in a row, and one smaller one set half a foot behind them, tucked near the dead grass strip like it had been there the whole time. If you'd asked me later what made the 4th one stand out, I couldn't have given you one detail big enough to justify the feeling. It was the size of a kitchen bag, tied off at the top, same black plastic, same upright posture, but it looked attentive. That is the only word I have for it. Like it wasn't discarded, like it was waiting. I stopped dead. Miguel leaned out the window. How many? 4. He didn't ask if I was sure. For a second I considered loading the original 3 and leaving the small one. That was how work thinks. Half a solution. Technical compliance. But I could feel the paper in my pocket like a hot coin. And all at once, the street seemed too quiet. No traffic from Mac. No dog bark. No TV sound from the occupied house across the way, where a blue porch bulb usually burned all night. The whole block felt padded. I backed up toward the truck without turning around. Miguel had the cab door open before I got there. I climbed in, slammed mine, and he pulled off hard enough to rattle the mirrors. Neither of us spoke until we were at the next light. "Dispatch is gonna ask why we skipped it," he said. "Sunrise," I said. He looked at me. "What?" "Nothing. I'll handle it." I didn't tell dispatch anything that night. I waited until after 6, when gray had settled into the streets and everything looked explainable again, and marked the stop inaccessible due to curb obstruction. Nobody questioned it. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they did, and preferred not to. The next week there were 3 again. We loaded them, waited to compact, heard nothing. The week after that there were 3 from the cab and 3 from the curb. But as I bent to grab the middle bag, I noticed little scuffs in the dirt under the front fence gate, like something heavy had been dragged through there recently. The gate itself was chained shut from the outside. The week after that, I learned why the rule about compaction existed. I took the 3 bags clean and fast, climbed back on, and slapped the side panel twice for Miguel to roll. We made it halfway to the corner before the urge to hit the packer got the better of me. It wasn't even impatience, not exactly. More like habit with a truck already half loaded. You compact to make room. That's the rhythm. That's the job. I reached for the control lever. Miguel barked my name so sharp I froze. He hadn't even seen the paper, but he knew the house by then, and he had his own way of building superstitions out of repeated unease. He shook his head once. We crossed the first intersection, then the second. The house was gone from the mirrors. I pulled the lever. The compactor ram shoved forward with the usual hydraulic groan. Trash shifted, metal scraped. Then, from the crushed dark behind the packer blade, a voice said, very clearly, "Hold up!" I don't mean it sounded like a voice. I mean it was a voice. Male, rough, close enough it could have been somebody crouched inside the hopper. 2 words, calm as if asking a coworker not to close a door yet. Miguel braked so hard I hit the dashboard with my shoulder. We sat there listening to the engine idle. Then came 3 knocks from inside the load. Slow, hollow, measured. Miguel whispered, "Don't open it." I wasn't planning to. My hands had gone numb from the elbows down. There are moments when fear arrives hot and loud, and there are moments when it comes in cold and makes the body economical. That was the second kind. Every movement I made after that felt borrowed. I got back in the cab. Miguel drove without saying a word. We passed under a burned-out streetlight, took the service road, and headed for transfer with those knocks, happening every few minutes behind us. Always 3 at a time, never faster, never more urgent, which somehow made them worse. At the transfer station, the rule made sense for the first time. Not because I understood it, but because the men who worked there understood enough not to ask questions when we told them to dump the whole load untouched. The loader operator, a broad guy named Smitty who acted like nothing in the world had surprised him since 1998, took one look at my face and waved us toward the far lane instead of the usual tip floor. "Stay in the cab," he said, so we did. From inside the windshield, I watched him use the loader bucket to rip the load loose after we lifted the bed. Garbage slid out in a wet, collapsing mass under the floodlights. Black bags, cardboard, branches, soaked drywall, restaurant trash. Nothing climbed out. Nothing obviously wrong. Smitty pushed it toward the pit in slow passes. On his third pass, he stopped and backed up. Something long and pale had worked free from one of the Keating bags and was hanging over the bucket lip. For one impossible second, I thought it was an arm. Then it rolled and I saw it was only a length of white curtain rod, stained at one end. Smitty pushed the whole thing into the pit without a word. When we got back to the yard, Miguel asked to see the paper. I let him read it under the garage light, and when he finished, he folded it exactly along the existing creases and handed it back like he was returning something borrowed from a church. "Who wrote this?" "Vernon." He rubbed his jaw. "You believe this?" I looked at him. "You hear what I heard?" He didn't answer. We kept the stop. That's the part people never like when I tell this. They want to know why we didn't refuse, quit, call the police, call the news, drag a priest out there if that made them feel better. The answer is simple and ugly. Once a thing gets folded into routine, people can survive almost anything by calling it procedure. We weren't brave, we were employed. The rules turned the fear into tasks, and tasks are easier to carry. The fourth rule kept us alive. The sixth almost broke me. It happened in late October, first hard cold of the year, the kind that makes wet leaves stick black to the curb. Keating had looked deader than usual all month. Somebody had smashed the front storm door glass, but the frame still hung shut. The chain-link fence gate was off one hinge and resting crooked in the weeds. There were city spray marks on the sidewalk out front where utilities had tagged lines for some job that never happened. At 12:17, the 3 bags appeared like always. From the cab, I counted 3. From the curb, 3. I grabbed the first 2 without issue. The third was heavier, dense in the bottom like books or broken tile. I had my gloves under the knot and my knees bent to heave it when I heard the storm door click open behind me. It was a small sound, ordinary, the sound a house makes when someone steps out to correct you on where they want the cans put back. Every muscle in my back locked. The rule said don't look. That sounds easy until you try it. Human attention has weight. When you know somebody is behind you, your eyes want to turn, whether you command them or not. I kept mine fixed on the hopper lip and lifted the bag. Something in it shifted against my shins. The door creaked wider. No footsteps came across the porch, just the sense of a person standing still and watching from a few yards away. I threw the bag in and reached for the step rail. Then a woman's voice, thin and dry as paper, said, "You forgot one." The words came from directly behind my left shoulder, close enough that if I had turned fast, I think my face would have hit hers. I didn't turn. My throat closed so tight I couldn't speak. I slapped the truck panel twice. Miguel hit the gas before I had both feet planted on the step. As we rolled off, something brushed the back of my coat, not a grab, not a strike, more like fingertips dragging across wet fabric. I hauled myself onto the side rail and kept my eyes on the mirror because I wanted to know if someone had come off the porch, if there was any ordinary explanation left to salvage. In the mirror, the storm door stood open. No one was there. But at the curb, where I had just lifted the last bag, there was now a fourth one standing by itself. Small, black, upright, waiting. We did not go back. For the next 2 blocks my skin kept trying to tell me there was still a hand on my coat. When we stopped under a street lamp, I stripped it off right there on the step and checked the back. There were 5 dark streaks across the yellow reflective strip, evenly spaced, wet, as if someone had drawn a damp hand through soot and dragged it downward. They smelled like basement water. Miguel wouldn't touch the coat. He told me to throw it in the hopper and leave it uncompacted until transfer. I did. On the ride over, something in the load tapped against metal in no pattern I could settle into. Not a message, just attention-seeking. Transfer was different that night. Smitty wasn't there. A younger operator I didn't know tried to make us unload on the main floor until Miguel said the address out loud. The kid's expression changed fast enough to tell me Keating had lived in more mouths than Vernon's. "You got material from there?" he asked. Miguel nodded. The kid looked over his shoulder at the older man in the scale shack, then back at us. "Lane 4, don't open." When the bed went up, I watched my coat slide free with the rest. For a second it snagged on something inside the load and hung there, sleeves spread like a man with his arms out. Then it tore loose and disappeared under a cascade of broken plaster and leaves. Under the floodlights I saw something else among the dumped trash. A square of white caught in black plastic. Paper. It stuck to the wet concrete as the rest shifted away. The loader rolled past it once. On the second pass, the bucket edge flipped it over and I saw printed lines like a form. I don't know why that mattered more than the voice had. Maybe because a voice can still be blamed on stress, echoes, fatigue. A piece of paper mixed in with the trash felt intentional in a way panic never does. After the loader shoved the pile toward the pit, I got out and walked over before the operator could stop me. The paper was a photograph, not a form. Cheap 1-hour print. Water damaged but intact enough to see. It showed 3 men standing beside an old sanitation truck at night. Flash glare washed half the image out, but I could still make out the city seal on the door, the reflective stripes on the jackets, the grin on one of the younger guys holding a coffee cup. The man in the middle was Vernon, maybe 15 years younger. The man on the right was a broad-shouldered black guy I didn't recognize. The third man, the one with the coffee cup, had his face scratched away, not by water, not by accident, deliberately, with something sharp, cross-hatched until the paper had almost been cut through. On the back, in blue ink bled at the edges, somebody had written one name, Eric Pruitt. When I showed Vernon the photograph the next morning, he went pale in a way that made him look not older, but suddenly more tired than age should allow. "Where'd you get this?" "Load from Keating." He sat down on an overturned salt bucket without taking his eyes off the picture. "Pruitt rode with me for 6 months, he said. Good worker, too curious. What happened to him?" Vernon thumbed the scratched face without really touching it. "Officially, walked off the route one night and never came back to the truck." "Officially?" He looked up at me. He opened a bag. That was the first straight answer he ever gave me. I asked what was in it. He said, "His wife's robe." Then he folded the photo and put it in his pocket like a man putting away a knife. After that I started digging where I could. Not enough to get noticed. Just enough to see the edges of whatever people had built around Keating over the years. Old news archives at the library, city incident logs, a retired code inspector Miguel knew from church. Nothing clean ever surfaced, but pieces did. In 1987, there had been a fire at 1482 Keating. Basement only. Official cause electrical. One fatality listed as homeowner, Margaret Vale, age 59. No mention of family. In 1994, a missing juvenile report connected to the block, never solved. In 2003, a sanitation worker named Eric Pruitt, listed internally as job abandonment, no police follow-up accessible through the public request I made. In 2011, code enforcement attempted nuisance abatement on the property, and the contractor refused after 1 day, citing unsafe interior conditions. No details. The retired inspector had one detail. They kept finding bagged material on the basement stairs. He told Miguel, who told me. Nothing that should have been there. Old clothes, wet papers, personal effects. Same kind of stuff that disappears when people clear a house after a death, but nobody was living there. Then who put it there? The inspector had shrugged. City quit asking questions it couldn't afford. The winter we kept that stop was one of the coldest I remember. Pipes burst all over the east side. Bags froze to curbs. Alley ruts turned to axle-breaking ridges. On Keating, snow covered the dead lawn and softened the shape of the broken steps, so the whole front of the house looked almost gentle from a distance. That made it worse somehow. Horror wears better when it dresses plain. December was when the bags started coming with names, not written on the outside. You had to touch them. The first time, I was lifting the leftmost bag and felt something stiff inside pressing against the plastic. Rectangle shape. I thought maybe a picture frame or a piece of shelving. At transfer, after the load dumped, I spotted a library card laminated in clear plastic near the torn remains of the bag. It had my name on it. Not Darren Kessler. Darren James Kessler. Full middle name. Same branch library I'd used as a kid in St. Clair Shores before it closed. Expiration date from 1998. I hadn't seen that card in decades. I did not tell Miguel. The next week there was a zipper coin pouch in the load. Maroon vinyl. Split at the seam. My daughter had given me one almost like it in second grade after a school holiday shop. Hers had a little fake gold clasp shaped like a heart. This one had the clasp. I told myself people owned similar things. Cities are repetition. Manufacturing is repetition. Memory is lazy. But the lie got harder to hold when I found one of my old utility bills inside a burst bag in January, soaked through but readable, addressed to an apartment on Kelly Road I had lived in for 11 months after my divorce. That night I almost quit. I sat in the cab behind the transfer station while snow blew around the headlights and thought about walking into the superintendent's office at 7 a.m., dropping the keys on his desk, and telling him the city could feed someone else to whatever lived on Keating. Then I thought about my daughter's braces, the overtime I needed, and the fact that quitting would not remove the house from the world. It would only choose somebody new. Fear and responsibility make ugly business partners. The chapter that changed everything came in February, on a night with low fog crawling off the river and settling between houses. Keating looked half erased. We turned onto the block and couldn't see 1482 until we were almost on it. At 12:17, the curb was empty. At 12:17, there were not 3 bags, but 5. From the cab I counted 5. From the curb, 5. We should have left. There wasn't a rule for too many bags, but by then, I knew a change in pattern mattered more than the specific wording. The smart decision was to mark the stop and go. Then the radio crackled. Dispatch said there was a welfare request connected to our area. Patrol had gotten a call from a woman on Bewick saying she'd heard a child crying somewhere near Keating for the last hour. Officers had driven through, seen nothing, and moved on. Dispatch told us to keep an eye out for anybody in distress because we were the only city unit still working that side street. That's the trick of a practical life. The impossible never arrives alone. It comes braided into normal obligations. A child may be in danger. A route to finish. A truck already idling. 5 bags where there should have been 3. Miguel looked at me. We go? I stared at the house. The storm door was shut. No light inside. The 5 bags stood in a perfect line. Then I heard it. A thin sound. Not from the house. Not from the radio. From somewhere lower, closer, like it had been trapped under layers of cloth. A child crying. Not loud. More like a hitched breath. And a whimper. Muffled, as if through blankets. It came from the second bag. Every rational part of me knew how ridiculous that was. Sound carries strangely at night. Cats make noises people mistake for babies. Pipes groan. Foxes scream like women. But that sound landed in the oldest reflex there is, and before the rules could catch up, I was already off the truck. Miguel grabbed my sleeve. Darren. I shook him off and went to the bag. The crying came again, faint and breathless, from inside the plastic. I should have walked away. I know that now in the same useless way people know not to grab a live wire after they've already done it. But if there had been a real kid in there and I'd left because an old route note scared me, I'd have carried that longer than fear. I set my pocket knife against the seam and cut. The bag did not split open the way trash bags do when you're dealing with cans and paper and food waste. It relaxed. That is the only word. The tension went out of the plastic as if something holding it shut from inside had let go. A smell came out first. Wet carpet, mold, iron, cold air from deep underground, then cloth. I reached in and pulled up a child's winter coat, pink, soaked through and heavy. Beneath it came a knit cap, one tiny boot, a folder of school worksheets turned to paste. No body, no blood, just things. Layers and layers of things packed tight and wet, as if scooped from the floor of a flooded room. Then my gloved hand closed on a cassette recorder, one of those little handheld micro-cassette units reporters used to carry. Gray plastic, speaker grill cracked. A strip of masking tape on the side, with handwriting faded almost white. Pruitt. The crying had stopped. Behind me, Miguel said my name once, quietly, in the tone you use when you don't want something else to hear the fear in it. I stood up holding the recorder. The front door of 1482 Keating opened. I didn't look directly at it. I saw movement in the edge of my vision, enough to know something had filled the doorway. Tall, narrow, still. The fog moved around it, but not through it. Then, from that direction, a man's voice said, "That wasn't yours." Not angry, not surprised, more like a correction. The recorder in my hand clicked on by itself. Static burst from the speaker, followed by a man breathing hard. Then Vernon's younger voice, tinny and panicked from years ago, saying, "Eric, leave it!" Another voice answered through the static, younger, nervous. "And that's my wife's robe. That's Donna's." Then came 3 hard knocks, loud enough through the recorder to make me flinch. A dragging sound. Vernon yelling something I couldn't make out. Eric Pruitt saying, very clearly, "There's somebody in the basement." The tape warped into a shriek of static. I dropped the recorder like it had burned me. From the open bag at my feet came a new sound. Not crying, not breathing. Many small impacts from inside the packed layers, as if dozens of fingertips had just begun tapping against buried plastic, trying to find the surface. Miguel hauled me backward by the coat collar so hard my boots left the pavement. We stumbled to the truck. I hit the side panel with both hands, and he gunned it before I was fully on the step. As we pulled away, I looked once into the mirror. The figure in the doorway was gone, but the 5 bags were now 6, and one of them was standing on the porch. We didn't go to transfer first. We went to Vernon. He lived in a single-story place in Harper Woods, with a detached garage full of tools he'd arranged like a man still trying to impose order on things that resisted it. He opened the door in his long underwear and flannel shirt, took one look at my face, and let us in without asking why it was 1:30 in the morning. When I told him I had opened a bag, he shut his eyes like somebody hearing a diagnosis they expected, but hoped not to. "What you take out," I told him. At the mention of the recorder, he sat down hard in a kitchen chair. That tape should have gone with the load. It didn't. "No," he said. "It doesn't." Miguel asked him what was in the house. Vernon stared at the table for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Not a what, a where." He finally told us the rest. Back in the late 80s, after the basement fire, there had been rumors on the block that Margaret Vale kept taking in boarders under the table. Men between jobs, women with kids, cousins of cousins, who only needed a room for a month. Nothing official, cash, quiet. After the fire, nobody could ever make the numbers line up on who had been living there when it happened. One death on paper, too many missing names in the neighborhood for the same few years, pets disappearing, clothing found in alleys, wet trash with family photos turning up blocks away after storms. Sanitation got involved by accident. A crew serviced the house after it was supposed to be vacant and found bags at the curb. Inside those bags were items connected to people from the surrounding neighborhood, some missing, some dead elsewhere, some alive but swearing they had thrown those items away years earlier. Old shoes, schoolwork, hospital bracelets, house keys. Things that should have been lost to time showing up fresh and wet as if taken from a drain. So stop servicing it, Miguel said. Vernon laughed once, bitter. They tried. The weeks they left the bags, the block changed. Animals got into them. Kids tore one open. A dog dragged something onto the sidewalk that the city buried quiet. People on nearby porches started hearing voices at night calling them by name. Not from the house. From their own backyards, their basements, their garages. Then more bags started appearing, not just at 1482, but at neighboring curbs. Same black plastic, same wet weight, same stuff inside. The city went back to collecting from the house because the problem was smaller when the route contained it. Contained what? Vernon looked at me. Whatever keeps trying to clean itself out. The line should have sounded insane. Instead, after months on Keating, it felt precise. He told us Eric Pruitt had broken the pattern by opening a bag after hearing his wife's voice. Pruitt had no kids, no drinking problem, no reason to walk off a truck. But when Vernon looked back after the loading step, Eric was standing at the storm door of 1482 Keating, holding a bathrobe to his chest, like he had found somebody after a long search. The door closed behind him. Vernon never saw him again. Police searched the house and found nothing but a burned-out basement, standing water, and stacks of old newspapers fused to the floor. No Eric, no borders, no evidence worth the paperwork it would have taken. The city did what cities do. It converted terror into procedure and passed the note down to the next shift. Miguel asked the question I had been avoiding since I cut the bag. What happens now that he opened one? Vernon's answer was quiet enough that I almost missed it. Now it knows what to use on you. I didn't sleep after that. I went home after shift, showered until the water ran cold, and sat in my kitchen with all the lights on, while dawn flattened itself against the blinds. I kept seeing the pink child's coat, waterlogged and heavy in my hands. Kept hearing Eric Pruitt's voice on that recorder say there's somebody in the basement. I told myself I would call in sick the next Thursday, maybe the next month, maybe forever. Instead, on Tuesday, I found a black kitchen bag standing upright beside my backyard fence. It was noon. My house was in Roseville, nowhere near the route. I stood at the sliding door and looked at it for a full minute before I went outside. The knot was tied in the same clean turnaway style as Keating. No trash day, no reason for it to be there. My neighbor's dog, who barked at every passing squirrel, stood at the fence whining low and would not go near it. I did not touch the bag. I called Vernon. He came over in an hour with a shovel and a face already defeated. "You should have left the first one sealed," he said, not unkindly. We stood in my yard looking at the bag. "What do we do?" I asked. He said, "You don't open it." He slid the shovel under the bottom and rolled the bag onto a tarp without ever gripping it by hand. Whatever was inside shifted with that same soaked cloth heaviness. Together we loaded it into the bed of his pickup. He drove it straight to transfer and had a friend on day shift bury it in a municipal load bound for incineration. On Thursday we went back to Keating anyway, because by then I understood the shape of the trap. Avoidance wasn't escape, it was invitation. There were 7 bags at 12:17. From the cab, 7. From the curb, 7. I said, "No." Miguel nodded. Vernon had come with us in his own truck and was parked half a block back. He got out when he saw us stop. The 3 of us stood in the street under the orange lamp glow, none of us stepping closer to the curb than we had to. Then the front door opened. This time I looked. I don't know if breaking that rule made a difference, or if by then the rules had already failed, but I looked. The person in the doorway was my daughter. Not exactly. That is important. It had her height from maybe age 12, her old winter coat from middle school, her way of standing with one knee turned in when she was shy. But the face was dim, unfixed, like a reflection on dark water, trying to hold a shape. Features slid in and out of certainty, eyes too shadowed, mouth too still. She said, Dad? Miguel grabbed my arm so hard he bruised it through the coat. I could not answer. The part of me that knew better, and the part of me that would die for that voice, hit each other head-on and left me hollow. From inside the house, deeper back, another voice called my daughter's name. Then another. Then another. Different ages, different tones. Men, women, children. A house full of people calling for someone to come downstairs. Vernon spoke without taking his eyes off the porch. If we leave it tonight, it won't stay here. I knew what he meant. It had already come to my yard once. Maybe it would go to Miguel's next. Maybe to my daughter's apartment when she moved out. Maybe to the neighbor who opened the wrong thing out of simple kindness. The city solution had always been containment. Cheap, ugly containment. What do we do? Miguel asked. Vernon looked at the bags. Take the curb load. Don't compact. Don't stop for anything. What about the house? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. We loaded 7 bags while the thing in the doorway watched with my daughter's shape draped over it like clothing. I kept my eyes on the curb. And on the 3rd bag, something inside said my name in a hoarse whisper. On the 5th, one of the bags twitched against my shin. On the 7th, I felt through the plastic what was unmistakably the shape of a human hand, pressed flat from inside, fingers spread, gone by the time I reeled back. We got them all. As Miguel pulled away, Vernon walked up the path toward the porch. I shouted at him. He waved me off without turning. Later I understood. He had been carrying that house longer than any of us. Maybe he believed there was something left to settle. Maybe he was tired of handing rules down like inheritance. Maybe he knew one of us had to stay with the load, and one of us had to see if the source could be finished. He reached the steps. The figure in the doorway stepped back into darkness. Vernon went in. The storm door swung closed. Miguel drove because I told him to. I don't remember that decision, only its aftermath. 2 blocks, no compaction, straight to transfer. The entire ride. The bags in the hopper shifted with a slow collective movement, like a crowd adjusting its weight. No knocks, no voices. That silence was worse. It felt like listening to people hold their breath. At transfer, Smitty was back on nights. He took one look at the load and called somebody from the scale shack I had never seen before. A woman, in a city parka with no name patch, who watched our truck with the expression of a person confirming a pattern she hated but expected. They sent us to the far lane and had a bulldozer ready before we even raised the bed. When the load came down, one bag burst wide, not from impact. It split along a seam as if opened from inside. A rush of wet fabric and paper spilled onto the concrete. Coats, towels, picture frames, children's shoes, a stack of mildewed envelopes tied with twine, and in the middle of it all, a brass house key on a red float tag. Stamped into the tag were the numbers 1482. The woman in the city parka told Smitty to push everything into the incinerator stream immediately. No sorting, no recovery. Her voice shook only once, when a small cassette recorder slid out of the pile and landed speaker up at her boots. It clicked on, static, then Vernon Hale's voice, old and tired, speaking from somewhere with a wet echo under it. "If this gets out," he said, "don't bring it back to the curb." The tape cut. Smitty buried the recorder under a ton of municipal waste and never looked at us again. Police took our statements because Vernon never came back out of the house. They did a search by daylight. I know because they made me ride along to point out the property. What they found matched every useless report before it. Vacant interior, fire damage, water in the basement, no sign of Vernon, no sign of recent occupation. The storm door was hanging open. The front room smelled like char and wet wood. Upstairs had raccoon droppings and peeled plaster. In the basement, the water line stained the concrete blocks about 2 feet up. I stood at the top of the stairs and would not go farther. One detective shined his light around and muttered that the old man probably wandered off scared or confused. Then his beam paused on the basement wall. Somebody had written 7 lines there in dark grease pencil script, all capital letters, all neat as root notes. Never before 12:17. Count from the cab. If the number changes, leave no warm bags, no compaction in sight of the house. Do not look at the door. Do not bring anything home. Below the list, lower on the wall where floodwater had half erased it, was one more line. When it runs out of room, it uses the street. The detective called it vandalism. Took photos, moved on. The city demolished 14082 Keating 6 months later, after a funding package finally cleared for nuisance structures on the block. They notified nearby residents, posted the permit, sent the excavator. I took that day off and still drove over to watch from half a street away. The machine chewed through the porch first, then the front rooms, then the roof, folding inward in a spray of old insulation and black dust. Nothing dramatic happened. No screams, no sinkhole, no black tide rising from the basement, just wood breaking, brick collapsing, and men in hard hats doing a job. Then they hit the foundation. The operator stopped the bucket and backed off. A foreman waved people clear. Even from down the block I could smell it, a sudden exhale of cold, wet rot that had been sealed underground too long. The excavator dug again, slower. They loaded out soil, charred beams, broken concrete. At one point, the bucket lifted something that looked like a length of chain-link fencing tangled with roots. It wasn't fencing. It was a lattice of black trash bag plastic, layer over layer, fused together by pressure and damp into something like hide. The sunlight hit it, and I saw shapes within the sheen. Sleeves, hair ribbons, a license plate corner, a child's sneaker sole. The operator dropped it fast and buried it under rubble before anybody could study it too long. The official report said nothing unusual was discovered during demolition. The lot is grass now, or as close to grass as vacant city land gets. Somebody cut the weeds once that first summer, then stopped. The curb is still there. If you drive by at noon, it looks smaller than you'd expect. Harmless. I lasted another year with sanitation before my shoulder finally gave out and they moved me off the truck. I work indoor maintenance now. Fluorescent lights, concrete floors, predictable trash. I see my daughter on weekends. She's grown. She laughs at how carefully I tie bags before taking them out. I never told her why. Once in a while, especially in heavy rain, I still wake up thinking I hear 3 knocks from somewhere in the house. Not on the front door, not from the pipes, from deeper down, as if there were a basement under my place when there isn't one. Some mornings I find the outside lid standing open, though I know I latched it. Twice I've found black bags on the curb the night before collection, when I'm certain I hadn't taken them out yet. I don't touch them until after midnight. Maybe that sounds like surrender. Maybe it is. But rules are what remain when understanding fails. And I learned a long time ago that cities don't destroy everything they bury. Sometimes they just move the problem until it fits inside procedure. That's what still bothers me. Not the house on Keating, not even Vernon disappearing into it. It's the possibility that 1482 was never unique. Just one place where the seams wore thin enough for working men to notice. One address, where whatever collects the wet leftovers of people learned the city would always come if it set the bags out neat enough. Every Thursday night, somewhere between habit and dread, I check the clock when it gets close to 12:17, and if I hear the plastic outside settle against the curb, I stay in my chair and wait for the truck, because I know now the worst thing in the world isn't a haunted house. It's a system that knows exactly how to service one.